Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot. Well, I guess today I should say I'm a long-time flight simmer and therefore gonna bust the physics of MSFS, but that's exactly what we're going to do today. So today we're going to fly Hypersonic in flight level 2400. For those of you who are not aware, that's 240,000 feet. In the Miltech Mirage 2000C, but you can literally do this trick in most aircraft that have an afterburner and that can fly Mach 2 plus in this simulator. I found out about it while I was about to test the performance of the Mirage, and I found that there is actually a way to slip out of the normal flight envelope and into the type of physics they probably designed with the Dark Star in mind. But let's go ahead and hop into the Mirage and find out what kind of trick I'm talking about. So join me in the cockpit, and you please do not do this at home. Alright, so let's start by closing the canopy up here, then we can power the aircraft up. 1, 2, 3, and then lights. All of them coming on, then we can remove all the ground equipment. And with that, we are basically ready to start. One important thing is to verify that you actually have full fuel tanks on board, but no external tanks, since they would provide additional drag, which we absolutely don't want today. Alright, the aircraft's powered. Let's go ahead and start it up. Fuel vent open, fuel valve open, and start up. So, while the engine start is in progress, we can already start to think about programming our INS. So let's verify we're in normal mode and we're in input mode. And then we can prep waypoint number 01 and insert the coordinates of Cambrai Air Force Base, which is at 5013.1. And the east coordinate is 3096. Like that. Alright, then let's go over to status and do an immediate alignment here. Verify that. Alignment in progress. 3 seconds to 1, 0. And ready for service. So let's go to nav mode, main mode. And I am quickly going to program one more waypoint, which is going to be at Le Havre, just so that we have a little bit of a route to follow. That's going to be 4930.5. And the east coordinate is 0005.6. Alright, and to that, our destination is initially going to be waypoint number 2. And here we go. So let's turn on the engine-driven generator, remove the external power, activate nav mode, turn on our radar, and with that we are ready to go and taxi. So park and brake is released, nose wheel steering is coming on. Then let's do a quick brake check over here, and that is working okay. And then we can taxi out to runway 28 for our departure for our space flights. So while we're taxiing, a couple of explanations of what you can see on the flight instruments, since that is going to become rather important throughout our flight. So on the top left you've got the indicated airspeed. Just below that you have your Mach number. And then on the right hand side you have your altimeter, but do note that you can change your altimeter readout. So first things first, of course I am going to dial in the correct QNH here, which is 1030 for the time being, giving us 280 feet of altitude. But using the selector down here we can change between barometric altitude, radio altitude, and then a selected altitude above a certain minimum level. That would, for example, be used if we were doing training exercises, and if we have a hard deck somewhere, then we could set that hard deck in here so that our altimeter indicates 0 if we crash into the virtual ground. For today's flight, I will initially keep it on the actual altimeter setting. So, that much about the basics. You can see our first waypoint, Le Havre, is 126 miles down to the pretty much west-southwest, but I can promise you it's not going to take us too long to actually get there. Alright, lining up on runway 28 via Alpha, the approach sector is clear and the left side is also clear. So remember everyone, we are purely doing this for scientific research, or as the military would tend to say, we're doing this for weather research. Alright, there's runway 28 right over here. Line up, stop the craft, and then let's be sure we've got terrain following mode active, which we have now. Alright, so, are you ready to go? Then, let's set power. Thrust levers full forward. Start the timer, release brakes, and let's turn on the burners. $100 knots, 120, rotate, and we'll get it into shallow climb at first, positive rate, gear up. And then the first thing we're going to do is to build up speed parallel to the runway so that we can do a steep climb. We initiate the pull-up maneuver at 450 knots, and then the target is to remain subsonic throughout the climb. So here we go, 450 knots. Let's pull the nose up before we eventually reach supersonic speeds. And here we go, Mach 0.99, Mach 1. Let's just pull it slightly out of that again. And here we go. That's a lovely angle for the initial climb, isn't it? Wish we could do that in the A330. And the best thing of all, look at that, we're pretty much maintaining our Mach number here. So I'm going to pitch down slightly so that we maintain between Mach 0.90 and Mach 0.1. The idea is that we get to an altitude of somewhere around 40,000 feet or so with this initial climb, so that we can build up some inertia and some energy for the dive that is going to follow this initial climb. So let's turn the aircraft towards Le Havre, because it will be very hard to do turns later on. Alright, we're reaching and exceeding 41,000, which is where the airliners would fly, so we are now free to maneuver as we like. We're down to Mach 0.8, so let's go ahead and level off. By the way, for the records, it took us 1 minute and 55 seconds to make it to 46,000 feet on this initial climb. That's quite impressive, isn't it? Alright, so now we are going to level off, build up airspeed as the afterburners are pushing us forward. We always have to keep a little eye on our fuel over here. We started with 3,300 kilos in each tank, so gotta keep an eye on this one, because this is a rather fuel-intensive maneuver. Alright, so Mach 0.99. Let's pitch down, start accelerate, and now the key is to achieve sufficient acceleration so that the shock waves caused by the break through the sound barrier form so far behind the aircraft that we are getting rid of any of the drag of those shock waves. This is pretty much the pitch down maneuver that you do in the Dark Star when you start your acceleration to Mach 3.5. We don't quite go to 3.5, but looking at this you can see we're at 1.6 now, and getting down to about 30,000 feet I am going to start a pitch up and then continue a climb at about Mach 2 or Mach 2.2. Alright, we're exceeding 750, which is maximum indicated, but we're fast enough. We're almost at Mach 2. And here we go. Now we can start our climb, and this is the climb that will lead us into the hypersonic speeds and all the way to 240,000 feet of altitude. You can basically climb the aircraft so that you maintain round about between Mach 2 and Mach 2.2. And now it's going to take us a little while here, while we are busting the altitude limits and the physics of Flight Simulator 2024. So, going outside, it's really getting quiet. Let's try to find the cone of the shockwave. here it is. Over here we are outside, so the shockwaves are kind of moving like this now. And over here we're getting back into it, so somewhere like this. That means the entire part of the wing outside of that shockwave doesn't create any drag anymore. And I think that's how this bug is working. I think that's how we're getting the immense acceleration and altitude gain that we are gathering right now. So you can see we're still at Mach 2, going through 66,000 feet. Let's pitch it down a little. Now we're looking for an angle that's just above 5 degrees, so around about 6 degrees. And that is going to maintain the Mach number while we're constantly gaining altitude. If we're looking down at the instruments, you can see the vertical speed indicator is stuck all the way to 6,000, and our altimeter is just increasing and increasing. The indicated airspeed is going down as our Mach number stays constant with increasing altitude. That is happening because the air density is decreasing, therefore there is less pressure building on the aircraft, and we're getting faster and faster. Now, at this altitude and this Mach number, which equals just about 370 knots indicated, if we look down at our INS, we can see we're almost doing 1,200 knots over the ground already. And this is getting us to Le Havre within 3 minutes. Right now, the key is just to maintain the current pitch and the current rate of climb, and to maintain the airspeed somewhere between Mach 2 and Mach 2.2. And by maintaining that, we are basically breaking the physics barrier over here. Yeah, I know, some people talk about breaking the sound barrier, others are talking about breaking the light barrier. I'm talking about breaking the physics barrier, which is exactly what we're doing at the moment. Because now we are already over 90,000 feet, and we'll pretty quickly get up to 100,000, and you can see how the altimeter just starts to increase quicker and quicker now. You can nicely see that on the round gauge as well, how the pointer is just accelerating now. Now look at this, getting quicker and quicker, and now we've broken the physics barrier. Now we're in an unrestricted climb. So watch how the altimeter is increasing now. It's getting quicker and quicker until eventually we'll be skyrocketed up to 240,000 feet. So watch that. The pointer is still accelerating, increasing our rate of climb while maintaining the Mach number. The indicated airspeed is going down, but I think at this point we've left the artificial gravity in the simulator, and therefore the burners are just pumping us up into the space. Of course, in the real world the engine would have quit by now, because there simply wouldn't be sufficient air. But look at the altimeter now. Look at that. Look at how quickly the dial is turning. 60,000, 170,000, 180,000. Look at that. And bang, here we are. 245,000 feet. That's the maximum you can achieve in Microsoft Flight Simulator. The simulator doesn't allow you to climb any higher than this. However, you can also see how our fuel flow is exponentially increasing now. Therefore, we gotta make good usage of the fuel we now have available. So let's pitch down a little bit. I'm also going to initiate a turn already, and now watch our Mach number increase. We're just doing 15 knots indicated now. 15, but you can see how the Mach number is increasing immensely. And now look at our ground speed down here on the INS. In the meantime, I will insert a flight back to waypoint 01, which is our home base where we just departed from. Now look at that, Mach 4, still accelerating. Look at the ground speed gauge. 2,900 knots, 3,000 knots, accelerating quickly now. However, while we're accelerating, we've already got to turn the aircraft back towards our point of origin, because look at how quickly we are departing from that point of origin now. 161 miles, 162, 163. So now it's all about pulling a turn and keeping our turn radius in mind. We're now at Mach 6.6, accelerating rapidly, 4,000 knots ground speed, and accelerating rapidly So now we've completely broken the physics barrier in Flight Simulator 2024. However, if you look at our fuel consumption, you can see our fuel gauges are going down rapidly down here. So now we've really got to turn the aircraft around and be careful not to pass out. So we've got a G meter up here. We can keep it at roughly 4.5, but pull over 5 Gs and you're going to pass out. So now we're 200 miles from the base. The key now is really to get the pointer above the 90-degree bearing, because only there we're going to start to close the distance again. Now look at our gauges. We're at Mach 7.8, 245,000 feet. And now it's all about getting the aircraft back to base before we are eventually running out of fuel. Because you can see how quickly our fuel quantity is decreasing down here. The fuel flow has somewhat settled down, but it's still 250 kilos a minute, and we only have 1,500 kilos in the tanks now. So if we maintain this kind of flight, we have around 5 minutes of fuel in the tanks. So we better make sure that we are getting back towards our base. Now you can kind of see our distance up here on the HUD. We're now 193 nautical miles from our base and still doing Mach 0.78, or rather Mach 7.8. That sounded wrong. And like that, we're now 185 miles from our base and closing rapidly. So we'll have to consider our re-entry and plan our re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere and into the MSFS physics model by now. Which is probably one of the most interesting things, because you can see our fuel is now almost down at bingo fuel, and we really got to cut the burners in a few moments. But if we end up 100 miles away from our base, then we're basically not going to get back with the amount of fuel that we have on board. So I'm going to cut the burners now. After burners are out, but you can see that barely makes a difference up here. But after those 11 minutes and 40 flight time, our tanks are getting close to empty. Now we're 130 miles from our destination. That is round about where the airliners would start the descent, from 200,000 feet below us. So let's go ahead, turn the aircraft over. 117 miles from destination. Ground speed 4,500 knots. But we're now going to put her into a descent at around about a 20-degree angle. Now we are absolutely going to overspeed over here. That is without any questions. Alright, that was the bingo fuel. 100 miles from destination. So here we go. Passing 10,000 knots indicated and slowing down rapidly. 70 miles. Making sure we turn the aircraft into the right direction over here. So, going through 1,400 knots, Mach 3. (1,000 knots, 40,000 feet. Alright, now we are below 750 knots. That means our overspeed warning is going to go out. And we have 60 nautical miles to run. Looks pretty good to me, so let's get some thrust back on so that we make it back to our destination quickly. Well, my friends, and that is our hypersonic flight at 450,000 feet. Now let's bring her back to base. We're now still doing 800 knots over the ground, slowly decelerating here, going through Mach 1.5 at the moment. Now we're at a distance of about 54 miles from our destination, 30,000 feet. In an airliner, impossible. In this aircraft, well, we're flying full power right now. It'll work. It'll work. So, let's summarize what we've just done and how we've tricked the simulator around its physics. So basically I'm imagining that the physics in the sim are kinda made for Darkstar, and they want Darkstar to be able to bring it all the way up to Mach 10. Now, while doing that, they have probably enabled a little bit of an area where you can just break through the physics barrier, as I like to call it, and then fly the aircraft right down to those same speeds and altitudes where you can take Darkstar. Now, for sure there is some sort of real-world physics that is based on, right? Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's take a small moment here to talk about what kind of real-world physics those are and how you can bust them. We do have 3 minutes left until destination, so let's go ahead and make use of them. So in the real world, when you want to bring in a fighter jet up to Mach 2, you can't just go level flight, put on the burners, and wait until it accelerates to that point. Most fighters are going to stop acceleration somewhere around roughly Mach 1.3 to Mach 1.4. That is the point where your aircraft is... let me phrase that different. That is the point where the shock waves that form by going through the sound barrier are basically attached to the aircraft and causing drag. When you go into that dive in order to accelerate past that roughly Mach 1.3, those shock waves detach from the aircraft, significantly reducing your drag, and therefore the aircraft can then accelerate up to whatever top speed it is certified to fly. Usually Mach 2, Mach 2.2, depending on the aircraft that you're looking at. Modern ones more like Mach 1.7, but the idea is the same. Now, I guess that they simply didn't limit the point where the engine would cut out from the speed. So if you look, for example, at the SR-71 Blackbird, that aircraft has a variable intake of the engines that determines how much air can actually enter the engine. And the air that's inside the engine is then actually at subsonic, round about Mach 0.5. And that only works until you reach a certain speed. In the case of the Blackbird, roughly Mach 3.5. And thereafter, the air inside the engine would become supersonic, which would cause the engine to fail, and from that point we don't need to talk about top speeds anymore. But that is roughly the trick that we are using over here. MS, or Asobo, has probably not implemented that kind of trick into the aircraft. Oh, and here we go, that's our fuel tanks pretty much empty. So let's go ahead and land. There's our base down there, coming in at 500 knots. Of course I just ran the aircraft dry, so we gotta come down as a glider now, but we do have our standby instruments. Those shall be good enough. The only question is, will we be able to drop the gear? But I suppose we are gonna find out about that. So, nice downwind. Now we gotta time that we don't... Now we gotta time the downwind carefully so that we come in with sufficient altitude. But a good look at the speed indicator tells us how far we're or how fast we're going, therefore how far we can go. And here we go, that's looking good. So let's start our base turn. Passing 300 knots. That field is right down here. Let's pull a couple G's in order to get rid of the airspeed so that we can drop the gear. And here we go. 200 knots, gear down. Let's pull a couple G's into the other direction to get rid of the altitude. That's pretty much how they did it in Space Shuttle as well. So there's our runway. Now we gotta ensure that we actually hit it. What a bit of irony, isn't it? Like, we kinda flew it like Space Shuttle, including an entire re-entry, and now we're landing it like Space Shuttle as a glider. I like that. And no jokes about A330 pilots right now. Alright, let's pitch down a little bit. Gotta ensure we time this right, as we have no second attempt. Think about 160, 170 knots. That's quite good. Alright, so the gear is down, 3 green lights. Our speed is looking good, 170 knots. And here we are. Oop, let's not climb away. So, stabilize, hold, touchdown. And here we are, back on Earth, after our little trip to space. Well, my friends, and with that, welcome back down to Earth. Houston would like to say goodbye to you now. I hope you've all had a lot of fun enjoying this little excursion into space, enjoying our little excursion into supersonic, high supersonic, and even hypersonic flight. I hope you enjoyed this one. Be sure to leave your feedback in the comments below, and remember, you can also try this one in the F-18, which should basically be capable of such maneuvers as well. I would like to say goodbye to you now. Hope you enjoyed this one. Be sure to check out the Miltech Simulations Mirage 2000. And with that, thank you very much for watching. Like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.